nightmares in my head. I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hey guys, it's Paul and welcome back to my channel. I've got my bachelor's in criminal justice and a minor in psychology, and I'm going to say that for the next 17 videos because I'm just so proud of myself. On top of that, I am a board member for a nonprofit called Voices for the Silenced, and we help people that have missing loved ones in West Virginia get all the resources they need to aid in their search. So if you know someone that is missing in the West Virginia area, please get a hold of us and we'll do what we can. And today we are here to actually redo a case that I have already done. My first year of YouTube, I did upload about the Sodder children, but to be honest, that was my actually very first video I ever filmed, and I just have a lot of critiques about it. I'm really hard on myself because if you're a content creator, you know that you have a rough struggle at the beginning, right? So I wanted to redo this case to do it just a little bit more justice and make it, I don't know, a little bit more professional looking and not as amateur as I was when I did that video. Funny enough, it is one of my most viewed videos on my channel. It's at least in the top 10. So I know people are still interested. This case is wild. And honestly, when I kept looking up cold cases and missing person cases in West Virginia, this one kept coming up as the first missing person case in West Virginia, or missing people, as we know. I don't know if I believe that this is the first cold case or first missing people case in West Virginia, but I do believe it probably was the first documented missing person case, right? Missing people. You know what I mean. If you lived in West Virginia, I'm sure that you know about the Sodder children, so let's just get right in. We're going to first talk about the father, George Sodder. His name was Giorgio Sodder, and he was born in Tula, Sardinia, Italy in 1895. Now, he came with his brother to the United States in 1908 when he was only 13 years old. His brother actually went back to Italy as soon as they hit Ellis Island, but Giorgio did end up staying, in which he changed his name to George Sodder. Now, George, when he was alive, never really talked about why he came to America. We're not sure if there was problems or it was like a lot of immigrants where he just wanted a better opportunity for himself. We do know, and we'll talk about it a little later, that he was not agreeing government-wise what was going on in Italy. He did not like Mussolini, so that could be a driving factor, but he just never confirmed any reason as to why he came here. Now, at this time, it was while Mussolini was doing his thing, and so there were a lot of people that did not enjoy hearing George Sodder being so critical of Mussolini, because he had a lot of followers. Now, when he came over here, he did settle into like an Italian immigrant community, and so a lot of them did support Mussolini, and he rubbed people the wrong way, not liking him. Now, the first thing I could find that he found for work was in Pennsylvania working the railroads. He would bring water and other supplies to workers as they needed it. Now, a few years later, he did end up going to Smithers, West Virginia, which he got a driving job with like a truck company. This drove him to actually start his own trucking company. And with this job, he really helped bring fill dirt to construction sites and help kind of take away and bring stuff to coal mines. Now, once he was settled in this area, he did go to a music store and meet his future wife, Jenny Capriani. She was the music store owner's daughter, and she also lived in Smithers and had immigrated from Italy when she was younger. They did end up getting married in 1922, and they had 10 children. 10. I know that was normal back then, but I don't think I'm ever going to get used to hearing that people would have 10 kids. My grandpa was one of 13, and I just, no. No, two's enough. And they did end up getting the reputation as one of the most well-respected middle-class families in this area. They ended up moving to Fayetteville, West Virginia, and it had a dense Italian immigrant population. So they really felt at home being around these people again. But you've got to think, in Fayetteville at this time, the population was around 1,300 people, which means the Sodder family themselves took up 1% of the population of Fayetteville. Isn't that kind of wild? They ended up finding a 2-story timber frame house that they decided was going to be their family home. It was about 2 miles north of town, but it was really easy to get to Fayetteville. Now, all their children were born within like 20 years, from like 1923 to 1943. The oldest was John, and he was 22 at the age of the fire. Marion was 19 at the time of the fire. Now, Joe was 17 at the time of the fire, but I do want to point out that he was serving overseas during World War II, so we don't hear a whole lot about him in this story. Now, George Jr. was 16 at the time, Maurice was 14, Martha was 12, Lewis was 9, Jenny was 8, and Sylvia was 2. Now, in October 1945, there was a salesman that came to their door. Now, he was trying to sell them insurance, but when he realized George was not going to buy anything, he got extremely hostile. Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini. So yeah, that's a little freaky, right? Especially if you already know the whole story. Now, later on, another person had ended up coming to their house looking for work. For some reason, they walked to the back of the house to where the 2 fuse boxes were. Now, this guy told George, those are going to cause a fire one day. Now, George had these rewired and redone recently, and he had even had the local electric company come out and deem everything safe. Pretty much right before this happened, very close to when this happened. So that was a little weird, because why would he say that? All of this was new. Now, a few weeks before Christmas, George's older sons noticed that there was this car parked near the main highway in town. And it looked like the people in this car were watching the young Sodder kids walk home from school. When Christmas Eve came around in 1945, George, Jenny, and George Jr. had worked all day. But the family wanted to celebrate on Christmas Eve. Now, Marion had worked in a dime store in Fayetteville, and when she came home, she had gotten some things for some of the children at the store for their Christmas presents. Now, she wanted to surprise Martha, little Jenny, and Betty with some things she had gotten from her store for Christmas when she got home. And they were so excited to play with this stuff that they had asked the mom, Jenny, if they could stay up a little longer. And she said yes, as long as Maurice and Lewis go out and handle the animals and do their chores, you guys can stay up and go to bed when you feel like it. Now, George, John, and George Jr. were already asleep even when this conversation happened. Now, Jenny ended up taking Sylvia to bed with them. And like I said, Joe was in the military, off doing his thing with World War II, so he was never home during this. Now, at 12:30 a.m., Jenny woke up to the phone ringing. Now, she went downstairs to answer the phone, and it was a lady she didn't recognize the voice of. This person did ask for someone that Jenny didn't know who they were, so they kind of chalked it up to a wrong number. It did sound like there was like a party going on in the background of this call, and Jenny had said it was a little hard to hear what she was saying. Jenny went into the living room to check everything out, and the front door was unlocked. The curtains were still open, which was unusual. They usually closed them at nighttime, and the lights were still on. Now, Marion was asleep on the couch, so she did think that maybe the younger kids just went to bed. They didn't really think to do all that, to shut the house down for the night. So Jenny went over there, locked the door, turned the lights off, pulled the curtains closed, and went back to bed. Now, just 30 minutes later, at like 1 a.m., Jenny wakes up to a loud bang. that hit the roof, and then it sounded like something rolled off of it. But she didn't hear anything else after that, so she ended up just going back to sleep. But then just an hour later, at 2 a.m., Jenny woke up to the smell of smoke. She kind of walked around to figure out what was happening and realized George's office was on fire. And when she walked around to kind of figure out where this fire was, she realized that it was in George's office. There was the fire near the telephone and fuse box. Jenny woke George up real fast, and Jenny grabbed Sylvia and got out of that house. George woke John and George Jr. up, and I think it was understood that they were going to wake the younger kids up. Now, John allegedly went up to the attic to wake them up, but there also was rumors that he just stood at the bottom of the stairs and yelled up to them, because supposedly at this time the stairs were already on fire. George, Jenny, John Jr., Marion, and Sylvia all made it out of the house alive, but they were just sitting there screaming at the kids upstairs because they had not left the house yet. And these children were Maurice, Martha, Lewis, little Jenny, and Betty. And they never even heard a word from these children, not screaming upstairs, nothing. Now, the phone lines in the house were not working, so Marion ran to a neighbor's house to try to call for help. But they just could not get a hold of an operator. It wasn't as sufficient as nowadays is. Now, one of the neighbors also tried to call but couldn't get a hold of the operator either. So the neighbor tried to drive into town to find the fire chief, F.J. Morris. Now, F.J. Morris started calling his people, but they did like a phone tree type calling system. So he would call someone, then that person would call another firefighter, then that person would call another firefighter, and so on. And now I want to point out that the fire department was only 2.5 miles away from the Sodder home. 2.5 miles. Not very far at all. But this was a volunteer fire department. And once they got to the fire department, they really didn't have all the equipment they needed. I also want to point out that the fire chief himself didn't know how to drive the trucks, so he had to wait for other firefighters to even get there. What fire chief? Please tell me that's different now. Please tell me fire chiefs know how to work all equipment. Like, seriously, what the hell? What the hell? It took this fire department 7.5 hours to go 2.5 miles to this family's house. Can someone explain to me why it takes 7.5 hours to get to a fire that's 2.5 miles away from you? I need someone to explain that to me like I'm 5, because I just don't get it. Once they got there, the house had actually burned down in 45 minutes, so they were just completely too late. So, since the family had 7.5 hours to kill before they got there, George really did try absolutely everything to save his children. He went inside the house, but he just couldn't see anything. It was filled with smoke. So George tried to climb the outside of the house, and he even did this barefoot. Now, he did try to break a window, but ended up cutting his arm actually really bad. It was bleeding everywhere, and his throat was starting to get really, really sore from just screaming for his children. Now, him, George Jr., and John tried to get the ladder to put up towards the window to maybe make it easier to get the children out, but this ladder was not where they usually kept it. So he went to the water barrels to try to throw water onto the fire, because the police department was still nowhere to be seen, but the barrels were completely frozen because it was the winter in West Virginia. So he thought, let me move these 2 coal trucks over to the house and I can maybe climb into the window from standing on them. Except for, even though they worked just the day before, neither of them would turn on. So at some point, the family just stood there and watched their house burn to the ground, just waiting hours for the police department to get there. And people that gathered to watch this fire even said they never heard any types of screams, especially children screaming. Like, there was not sounds like that coming from the house. And there wasn't any smell of like burning flesh or anything like that. So once the fire department decided to finally get their happy asses there, the only thing they could really do was dig through ashes in the basement of this house. But by 10 a.m., they just deemed there was nothing they found. There was no bones, no signs of the children, nothing. So when the fire department got their well-warranted ass chewing about what took so long, they pretty much said they just had low manpower already due to the war. There wasn't as many volunteers. And then on top of that, it was Christmas Eve. They can't force people to come work. They're volunteers. And the fire chief Morris also, again, admitted he did not know how to drive these trucks. So he had to wait for someone else to get there that knew. And what a fucking flaw it is in their fire department for the fire chief not to know how to drive the transportation. I will die on that hill. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So the Sodder family started to believe that these 5 children were actually missing. They didn't think that they were in the fire. There was no signs of these children in that fire. And like I said, there was a lot of people gathering and watching the fire happen. I'm sure everyone understands that. If like something's happened at our neighbor's house, we're at least peeking out the window, right? And so this woman who was watching the fire from the road said there was a car that passed during the fire that looked like there were children and possibly the Sodder children in that car. So another woman that worked at a rest area between Fayetteville and Charleston said the next morning she served those kids breakfast. She saw them. She said that there was also a car outside that had a Florida license plate on it and thought maybe those two were linked. And so the ever so intelligent fire chief Morris said that these children must have been cremated in this fire. That's the only explanation. But again, there was never a smell of burning flesh from this fire. And I mean, everyone was around watching it, including the family. So somebody would have smelled something. That just didn't make sense. But I'm sure in ways he's just trying to cover his ass, right? What a royal fuck up. Fire Chief Morris did order George to not mess with the property at all. He wanted the state fire marshals to do their own investigation onto the property. But after 4 days of nothing, George and Jenny just couldn't stand to look at that property anymore like that. He did end up filling the basement with fill dirt and pretty much just making a memorial garden for his children, in which I think Jenny was the one that planted flowers there. On December 30th, the 5 death certificates for the children were issued, and their cause of death was the fire and asphyxiation. Now, 4 people did claim they saw the remains of these children, one of them being Jenny's brother. But it is thought that this is just something that people were saying. Nobody had any documented proof, and no investigator found anything themselves. Now, the funeral was on January 2nd, but I will be honest with you, George and Jenny were just grieving way too hard to even think about going to this funeral. But their siblings did show up to support them. Now, George and Jenny did suspect that this was arson, and they also believe that the children might have been taken by the Sicilian mafia because they were just very irritated at George's views on Mussolini. Do you think he was making that big of a deal, though, that he didn't like him for the mafia to come to a whole other country, to a small town, to steal his children and set his house on fire? Maybe. I guess maybe. Now, this case was looked into even into the early 1950s, but there was just nothing that was ever found, and I think at this point it became a cold case. There was a woman who managed a Charleston hotel that did come forward and claim that she is pretty sure that the Sodder children and I think 4 different adults had checked into this hotel just a week after they went missing. The children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian extraction. I do not remember the exact date. However, the entire party did register at the hotel and stayed in a large room with several beds. They registered about midnight. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. One of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. I sensed that I was being frozen out, so I said nothing more. They left the early morning. So, especially after hearing this, George and Jenny just really didn't trust what had came out of the investigation. So they really started to dig into everything the fire department was saying happened. The investigators were actually able to locate that woman that had called and had the wrong number. And it truly was a wrong number. She was at a party, but there was nothing weird about this. It truly was just a coincidence. But George and Jenny had also wanted to look into the telephone, like why it was not working when the fire happened. And a repairman came out and said that, oh, these cables were not burned in the fire. They were actually cut beforehand. And it had to be someone who was able to climb 14 feet up and then reach over 2 feet to cut this. And I think at first they thought that maybe the power lines too were cut, but Jenny pointed out later that this could not have happened because while the fire was going, especially at the beginning, their lights and stuff were still on in the house. And she said that if the lights were not on in the house, it is very possible that no one in the family would have made it out alive because they wouldn't have been able to see. Now, the ladder George and his 2 sons were trying to find right when the fire happened, that was not where they usually kept it, was found at the bottom of an embankment 15 feet away. Now, neighbors did end up coming forward saying they saw a man with a block and tackle that looked like they could have been leaving his property around the time of the fire, which made George think that that man must have messed with the engines of his truck. He thought maybe this was the same person that cut the phone lines, and they were able to track this person down. And when they found this person, he did admit to cutting the phone lines and what he thought was the power lines, but swore he had nothing to do with the fire. Now, the local coroner did say that he thought that the fire was from faulty wiring. But like I said, the Christmas lights were still working just fine during most of the fire. So could it really be faulty wiring if the electricity was still on and working? Now, the local newspaper falsely reported, of course, that the children were found. They then tried to retract their statement and say only one of the children's bodies were found, which was still not true. So I'm not really sure what's going on in Fayetteville at this time, but they had some massively incompetent people. In 1947, George ended up getting a hold of the FBI and being like, please look into my children missing. Like, please just dig into this case and help us find answers. And the FBI director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, did say this: although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau. He also said that if the local authorities invited the FBI in or said it was okay for them to come in, he did not care to help. but it was up to them, and they absolutely refused. The amount of cases in West Virginia that the FBI is willing to help with, and the police departments just refuse to invite them in, is actually crazy. And to know that this has been a pattern since the first documented missing people case of West Virginia is shocking. Just absolutely shocking. Now, a bus driver had came forward that was driving through Fayetteville on Christmas Eve. He said that it looked like people were throwing balls of fire towards the Sodder house. And then a few months later, once all the snow had melted, the family had went to go visit the memorial garden or fix it up. Maybe that's when they went to plant flowers, but had came to the site of where their house burnt down. And Sylvia, the youngest Sodder child, ended up finding this thing that was like dark green, hard, and like a rubber like ball. And when the parents looked at it, it 100% looked like a napalm pineapple bomb. And that is when George remembered that Jenny heard something hit the roof just an hour before this fire woke them up. So could this have been what hit that roof? So after the fire happened, there was a lot of appliances that were still recognizable. This fire was really only for 45 minutes. There were even parts of the tin roof among the ash, and so it's thought that there would for sure be bones seen among all this if even the appliances and tin roof were around. And so Jenny really started to study cremations. She ended up talking to local employees of crematoriums, and they told her that human bones even remain after burning at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours. And their house just did not burn that hot or that long. So where are her children's bones? She even started to do her own experiments to see if maybe it was possible. So she used animal bones, but the fire would consume them. They would burn around them, but it just did nothing to incinerate these bones. Nothing. Maybe char them a little bit, but still recognizable to be bones. Now, like I said, the Sodders were a little skeptical on how this investigation was running, so they ended up hiring their own private investigator named C.C. Tinsley. He was at first able to tell the family that insurance salesman that said that their family was going to be destroyed and their house was going to catch on fire, exactly what happened, right, was on the jury to figure out what happened to their house. So this insurance salesman that threatened their house burning down and their children being destroyed was on the jury to deem this house fire an accident. Again, is anybody in this town that is part of this investigation not incompetent? Just one person, please be a beacon of light in this and give this family some type of hope. According to Times West Virginian, this person used to work for or closely to George Sodder. So this insurance salesman knew him. And on top of that, their home insurance right before this fire was increased from $1,500 to $1,750 without their consent or knowledge. I'm going to take a deep breath before explaining the next dumb decision that Fire Chief Morris made in all of this. C.C. Tinsley also found out that Fire Chief Morris was talking about the fact that he buried a human heart among the rubble of the house in a dynamite box. Supposedly, Fire Chief Morris had admitted this to the local minister, and the minister ended up telling C.C. Tinsley. So George and C.C. Tinsley went to Fire Chief Morris and asked him about this. He then agreed to show them where he buried this box, and they went and dug it up. So they found the box and whatever was inside and took it to the local funeral director to look at. And when the local funeral director looked at it, he said, "This isn't a heart. This is a beef liver." And on top of that, it had never even been in a fire. So then they're looking at Fire Chief Morris like, why did you bury a beef liver where our house was on fire and then tell everybody it's a human heart? And supposedly Fire Chief Morris said that he did this to give them closure, that maybe they would find it and accept what happened to their children. Here's a shock. Maybe they could accept what happened to their children if you did literally an inkling of your job correctly. An inkling. He is most likely the main reason this will never be solved. Like, let's be real clear about that. In August 1949, George had convinced Oscar Hunter to please supervise a new search around his house site. Oscar Hunter was a Washington, D.C. pathologist, and there really wasn't much that they found that could help. But they did find a few things. A dictionary that was one of the children's, some damaged coins, and some human vertebrae fragments. So they sent these human vertebrae fragments to the Smithsonian to get looked at. And they confirmed that these were lumbar vertebrae for a man that would be between 16 to 22 years old. Now, the missing oldest Sodder child that was a male was Maurice, and he was only 14. And yeah, I know that doesn't sound like too big of a difference, but the growth in your vertebrae, it was nearly impossible that this could have been Maurice's vertebrae. Along with the fact that these vertebrae did not seem to be charred or exposed to fire at all. He also argued that if this was the children, they wouldn't just find human vertebrae fragments, they would find pretty much the whole skeleton. So again, they did not think this had anything to do with the children, and maybe it was brought in with the fill dirt that George used to fill the basement in, which is like a whole other mess of questions. Why in the world human vertebrae are in this fill dirt? But that's not what this video is about, so let's just keep it going on the Sodder children. The Smithsonian did end up giving these vertebrae back to George, but we have no idea where they are now, which is really unfortunate, because if George would have kept them, at least kept them somewhere someone would know, we could do DNA testing they didn't have in 1949, 1950 on this, but you know, it is what it is. Now, Governor Oki L. Patterson did end up just sticking the knife into this family and twisting along with everyone else. Now, the governor and the state superintendent, W.E. Burkett, deemed this case hopeless and just ended up closing it. And they just pretty much said the family's grief is clouding their brains on this matter, and so they just can't accept what really happened. Now, the FBI did try to pick it up as an interstate kidnapping, mostly because I think those people were claiming that they saw them in the car, they saw them at that hotel, they ate breakfast with them, they were with some random adults. But the case was dropped 2 years later because there was just absolutely no leads. The family, of course, did their own investigation that we have talked a little about already, but they also were hanging up flyers everywhere of their missing children. They even offered a $5,000 reward for any information to get their children back, but it did end up raising to $10,000 shortly after this. And I just want you to think, $10,000 and $5,000 is a lot of money now, but think about how much money that is in 1945, 1950. That's a lot of money. In 1952, the family did end up putting putting up a billboard with their children's faces on it, the reward money, and a description on what the case was about. And they did put it at the house site along State Route 16. And there also was another billboard put on Route 60 near Anstead. And the one at their house site stood for nearly 40 years until Jenny's death, which was in 1989. They did end up hiring another private investigator after C.C. Tinsley, but this person just seemed to have taken their money and ran with it. Now, George and Jenny did hear of a lot of sightings of their children over the years, and I'll just go ahead and say, so I don't have to say after every single one, George looked into every single one of the sightings of their children, or if he saw things and thought it might be the children. Every single one he looked into. There was a woman from St. Louis who got a hold of them that said that she thought their daughter Martha was at a convent there. Now, someone at a Texas bar said that they had a conversation about the Christmas Eve fire with someone that she thought was the boys. Someone from Florida had told them that they were pretty sure that the children were staying with Jenny's distant relative. I think they lived in Florida also. And in 1967, a woman wrote them saying that she had talked to two of the boys, Louis and Maurice, at a bar. She said that Louis confessed that they were the Sodder children, and Sylvia's husband ended up driving down there with George to check it out. But these two boys said they were lying about being brothers. Like, they were just, I guess, messing with this girl. And like I said, George looked into all of these, and every single one was deemed not them. Now, George did end up seeing a picture in a magazine of a young ballet dancer in New York City that he could have sworn was Betty. And he tried repeatedly to get a hold of this girl, but that girl's parents were like, yeah, absolutely not. Now, in the 1960s, Jenny had found a letter that was written to her from Kentucky. There was a picture of a young man in his mid-20s that really did actually look like Louis, and it had something written on the back of this picture that said, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, ill boys, A90132 or 35. This person looks like Louis. Even Jenny and George thought it was Louis. They had dark curly hair, the dark brown eyes, his nose was the same, and there was like this upward tilt to his left eyebrow that was pretty similar also. Now, what's weird is clearly Louis does not have a brother named Frank or Frankie or anything like that, but he did have an uncle named Frankie. And Jenny was like, is this the relative that people are talking about that kidnapped them and is raising them in Florida? And she even accused him of it. And you got to remember that the woman who served them breakfast had even said the car that they were in was a Florida license plate. Now, the ill boys, I really don't know how to say the IL. I'm trying my best. That was something that not even like internet sleuths can figure out. Everyone's a little dumbfounded about that part of the statement, but 90135 is a zip code in Sicily. Now, they did make changes to the billboards to have this picture now put on there because they really did believe that it could be Louis. But the person in the photo was truly never identified, and it was never figured out who sent that letter to Jenny or why. Now, John Sodder never really spoke about the fire. I think he kind of chalked it up that his siblings died in there, and he was just not sure why his family was dragging this out any longer and not just accepting that type of closure. I do wonder, though, if he had guilt for not actually going upstairs and getting them or making sure they were coming out of the house. And that's kind of how he dealt with it. Because that would be hard to think that it was your job to yell for the kids. And like none of the kids got out of the house that he was in charge of getting. George did end up dying in 1969 at 74 years old. Now, Jenny and all of the children except John continued this fight to search for the missing children. And she would only wear black as a sign of her mourning. And for the rest of her life, she took care of that garden. Jenny did end up dying in 1989 at 85 years old. And this is when the main billboard on the property did end up coming down for good. Now, the grandchildren of Jenny and George have tried to keep this story alive. They do interviews, they stay on online forums, they do media coverage, local authors have talked to them, there's been blogs, even NPR has covered this, and the History Channel. There was a theory going around that the Sicilian Mafia did take the children, but it was because George owed them money and he didn't have it to pay them back. But there's never been any definitive proof of that. Ever. They do think that if the children were taken, they were taken before the fire, so they might not have even really known that was the next step. It is thought that the children probably knew the person that took them because there was no screaming or anything that would have wakened Jenny up. I mean, she woke up to the phone ringing downstairs. She would have woke up if the children were yelling. And they do think that the fire was set so the family would panic about that and not realize that the children were missing until way later once they got a head start. If the children were taken anywhere, they do believe it was to Italy. And there also was a rumor that they tried to recruit George into the Sicilian Mafia and he declined, and this was his payment for not being a part of it. It is also possible this could just be a human trafficking scheme. John did actually make one type of comment towards this before he really just quit talking about it altogether, and he said, "Our thinking was the kidnappers might have been trying to take us all. My brother and I barely got out of the house, but you can't relive it." In 2016, firefighter Cruikshank said that George having these 55-gallon drums of gasoline around the fire could have clearly intensified it more than what these people thought it would be. And he did say that George filling in the basement with this fill dirt could have accidentally advanced the stages of decomposition and just the cremation process altogether. I don't understand that, but I'm sure firefighter Cruikshank knows way more than Fire Chief Morris, right? The last Sodder child, Sylvia, did end up dying in 2021 at 79 years old. Her earliest memory was this fire. And her dad George would stay up so late talking theories and just really diving into this case. And she did believe until the day she died that her siblings had survived this fire. But unfortunately, most people do believe that they did die in here. There's really just no answers either way. And I just personally don't believe that they died in this fire because there was just so much that Fire Chief Morris was trying to cover up, right? It's weird. But what do you guys think? Do you think that they died in this fire? Do you think that they were taken before? I mean, there's just so many questions, right? So many questions. I do think, unfortunately, that if these children got out of the fire, they probably all have passed even just from natural age at this point. Sylvia was the youngest, and she was 79 in 2021. So I really doubt any of them are still alive, even if they did make it out of this fire. But thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe for me. And hit that notification button. That way you're notified the next time I upload. I do have a GoFundMe going for Crystal Young, so if you've not watched that video yet, you need to, so you know why her mom needs this PI so bad. I still have stickers for sale. They're $2 each, and all proceeds go to the Cold Case Foundation, so it is for a good cause. And thank you guys again to getting me to 1,000 subscribers. It just means really so much. You have no idea. But I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.